Today we're making Thanksgiving dinner. I cannot believe it's the time of year when these recipes need to come together. But just like any traditional Thanksgiving, I have my own problems when I was in the process of cooking this meal. So join me as I show you exactly what went right and what went wrong, plus how to cut your cooking time of your turkey in half, make it extra crispy and juicy, plus how to make the pumpkin and pecan pies even healthier than normal and absolutely delicious at the same time. Join me as we do all of that and more while we hang out in the kitchen. Now, before we jump into what's going on, I want to give you a rundown of the menu and also let you know that all of the recipes will be down in the description for your convenience if you see anything you want to try out. My first order of business is a brioche braided bread, which was an absolute demand for my kiddos. They love it so much, and I tend to only bring it out on special occasions. So after that, we're going to have some garlic, green beans, a medley of roasted vegetables, including regular and sweet potatoes, onions, garlic, and Brussels sprouts, as well as some honey glazed carrots, a turkey, of course, as well as some pies and homemade whipped cream. Now, cooking a meal like this does take a little bit of advanced planning, and that's exactly what I did before I got started here. I sat down, looked at all of my recipes, figured out what I can make the day before and what I need to make the day of. In addition, made sure I had all of the ingredients on hand. So if you are planning to host Thanksgiving at your house or doing the bulk of the cooking, make sure you take a little time to plan it out and get everything scheduled accordingly. I do not have a double oven. It is one of the things that during this very cook, I thought, I can totally see the advantage at a house like mine, but I was able to pull it off quite successfully without that extra oven space with a little bit of advanced planning. So with the basics out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into exactly what I have going on in the kitchen. With butter browning over on the stove, it is time to officially get underway with our brown butter pecan pie bars. Now, if you have never tried one of these, you are in for a real treat if you pull out this recipe. These bars offer the richness and flavor of a pecan pie without the corn syrup, which is my least favorite ingredient of all time. That is in one of my all-time favorite desserts. So with this pecan pie bar, we start off with the crust. It's 1 cup of butter browning over on the stove, a half cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, a half teaspoon of salt, and 2 cups of flour for that base. Now with the butter, you want to go ahead and get it completely brown, not just melted. So when it gets to the point where it's foamy a little bit on top, you just go a little bit further, keeping your eyes on the heat. You want the solids to break up down in the pan into brown. And the suggestion from the recipe was also to make sure that you use a light colored pan so you can see the color changes on the butter, because you definitely do not want to burn it. So once you get it to the point where it's brown, you just go ahead and move it on off the stove. Let it cool for just a few minutes before you go ahead and add it into the rest of the ingredients needed for the base. Now, in the meantime, with the schedule like I have planned for the day, it's time to tackle the remaining dry ingredients needed for that brioche bread. The sponge itself has fully come together, so I will show you exactly what that looks like. You can see the recipe called to leave some dry flour on top and to let it crack before you move on. The purpose of the sponge is to make sure that the flour gets fully hydrated and all of the ingredients get nicely incorporated before moving on to next steps. Now, I have made a brioche braid in the past with sourdough. So if you're a sourdough fan, definitely know you can do that as well. Although the one I'm making today is a regular yeast recipe. So I will make sure to put both of those down below just in case you're looking for one or the other. Bread has such few basic ingredients that it really isn't that hard to make. It just takes a little bit of time to get everything fully put together. So with all my dry ingredients in the bowl, I'm getting them fully incorporated, and then we're going to move on to next steps once it has time to hydrate. I am using the dough hook here, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why I went with that over the roller later for those of you who are curious about my mixer and how to use it. Now, if you've ever visited my kitchen before, you know that my goal is to feed my family the highest quality foods possible at the lowest price, which is why I'm roasting up this beautiful bird from ButcherBox today. ButcherBox takes meat quality standards to a new level, delivering either custom or curated boxes of meats, including fish, beef, chicken, pork, and turkey, straight to your door. And starting today through Sunday, you can pick up either a turkey breast, or spiral ham free. Plus, take advantage of their flash sale, which is the best sale of the year, giving you an additional $100 in savings. So make sure to use my link below and join ButcherBox today to make this season's feast extra special with flavorful, top quality options. And thank you again to ButcherBox for sponsoring today's video. Now I will show you exactly what I'm gonna do to that turkey to make it extra special and extra easy a little bit later. But right now, it's time to get back to those brown butter pecan bars. But before I do, I have a quick question. It literally is nagging my mind. Do you say pecan or pecan? I would love it if you would leave your pronunciation below to settle a little friendly conversation between my children and I, as well as give us an opportunity to do a little study on statistics. So write down below pecan or pecan so we can see exactly what parts of the world say it the way we do and what parts of the world say it the opposite. But now that that's out of the way and off my mind, I can get back to the directions on this beautiful brown butter pecan bar. The first thing you want to do after you get the crust all put together, that butter has browned and we've added it to the dry ingredients, is get it pressed out in the bottom of a 9x13. This is going to give you just enough crust to be able to perfectly hold up your bar once you have completed the entire dish. So if you are using a smaller dish, make sure to cut the recipe in half. Otherwise, you'll just have too much crust for the appropriate ratio, in my opinion. Now, once you have got the crust pressed down, you're going to par bake it so it gets a little bit of the softness out of the way before we add the topping. And in the meantime, we're going to get to work on that topping so it's ready to go as soon as we are done. For the crust, you need a half cup of butter, which is 1 stick, a half cup of brown sugar, which if you were around last week, you saw me make that at home. If you're not currently making your brown sugar, make sure to go back and check out my pantry video I did last week on exactly how I take one ingredient and use it in multiple ways because I find it is so helpful around my kitchen. With that brown sugar complete, we're adding maple syrup. This is what we're using instead of the corn syrup, and it is so much more healthy for you. 2 tablespoons of heavy cream and 2 eggs. Now, once this is all together, we're going to put it over on the stove and get that heating up before we add the pecans or pecans. I don't know, whatever you call them. We're going to put them in after this gets heated up over on the stove. Now, I'm sure there are a couple of you out there wondering how I'm going to call this meal healthy at all. But for me, it's about making healthier choices, right? Anytime I can get rid of corn syrup in a dish and add in maple syrup, that's a healthier swap. And anytime I can do a pie bar instead of a big piece of pie, that's a healthier swap. You can just take the little bite and satisfy your sweet tooth and your craving for that food that you've just thought about all year long and go on. So that's exactly what we're going to do with these pecan pie bars. Now, once everything is heated up over on the stove, you bring a half cup of the liquid that you just heated to boiling back over to temper it into the eggs. You do not want to get scrambled eggs into your meal. So this is exactly how you're going to put it back in the dish without scrambling that egg. Once you slowly incorporate the full half cup of liquid that you pulled out of your topping, then you take that bowl back over and slowly reintroduce it into the remaining amount of liquid in the pan. Once that's complete, you add your pecans. Now, the recipe calls for 3 cups. I didn't have 3 cups. It was more like 2.5. And I actually think what I had was plenty. So if you don't have quite 3 cups, I wouldn't worry about it. Otherwise, you might have a few that kind of fall off the top if you have a full 3 cups because the pecans really set on top. And while the other ingredients in the topping were really nice, I think if you had the full 3 cups, it would have had a little bit of a harder time staying together. Once the topping is in and all smoothed out, you can add some flaky or coarse sea salt to the top if you want. That's totally optional, but I do find that it sets off the flavor quite beautifully. So if you have that laying around, make sure to just sprinkle some on top, and you want to go ahead and bake it in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes, using a toothpick, pulling it out of the center, making sure it comes out mostly clean. With the first dish mainly out of the way, it's time to turn our attention back to the brioche loaf. Now, this is going to be the most involved dish, or side dish, I should say, of the entire dinner. But I can promise you, if you take it the time and go to the effort to make this beautiful, you will not be sorry. I will say though, brioche is a really wet dough, as you can see here. That's why I'm using the dough hook instead of my roller that comes along with this mixer. I find that when I'm using a wetter dough, I need the hook in order to make it all come together. If you do not have a mixer of any kind, then this dough will be really hard for you to make because it is so wet. If you're using a stiffer dough, like a traditional loaf of bread, you can easily do that by hand kneading. Brioche is just a little bit more difficult to do based on the hydration. So with the butter all in there, I have that kneading. I left it, I set the timer for 12 minutes because that's as high as the timer will go on my mixer, and came back to the kitchen to work on the pumpkin pie, which was another request of my kiddos. I personally am not a huge pumpkin pie fan, and I know that's totally insulting to most of the people out there that totally love Thanksgiving foods, but it's just not my favorite. Is it good? Yes. Was this pie good? Yes. But if I can have a pecan pie bar, I'm definitely going for that over pumpkin pie. Not coincidentally, we have a couple pieces of pumpkin pie left a few days later. We definitely do not have any of that pecan pie bar. Now, with the pie, all you have to do is grab some pumpkin, canned pumpkin. It's not the pumpkin pie filling, but the actual canned pumpkin. I'm adding some salt, some vanilla, a little bit of sugar, some milk, and I'm totally cheating on my spices. I didn't have what the recipe actually called for, but I had a spice that combined all of the ingredients needed. It's actually from Pampered Chef. It was gifted to me. It's called Cinnamon Plus. I don't know if any of you have used it, but if you have it, it has all the pumpkin pie ingredients in it. So why not, right? So I just used 3 teaspoons of that instead of all of the individual spices that were required by my recipe. So if you're noticing a little difference in that and the written recipe down below, that is why. I also added maple syrup to this as a portion of the sweetener. Again, anytime I could do that, I do find that it's super helpful to go with less sugar and the syrup because it's a great natural source of a sweet flavor. With that being so fast, that is all you had to do for the pumpkin pie. I'm putting this filling in the refrigerator, and in a little bit, we'll tackle that crust. I'm just going to leave it in the refrigerator overnight and bake it first thing in the morning before I get started on everything else. So checking back on the dough, check this out. Can you see exactly how stretchy that got? I came in a few minutes before this and the dough is still super sticky. I almost quit and I'm like, you know what? At first I thought, no, I'm going to follow the recipe, but that's just not the way bread works. You have to read your dough and not the recipe. So if you go in there and it's so sticky, you can't do anything with it, then it's not time yet. But when you pull it up and you get that huge stretch, you can see that the gluten is formed so well. And at that point, it's shiny, it's smooth and silky, and then you're ready to go. So with that underway, I put the lid on it. It's going to rest in there for about 2 hours until it's doubled in size. And that's one of the other things I love about my mixers because it has a lid to go right on the bowl. So I can just leave it in there ready to go. I don't take it out and grease the bowl like any of the recipes ever call for. I've never had any problem with the dough being stuck to the side or anything that can't be worked through. So I just save myself a step and an extra dish and get going. Now we're onto that pie crust. You just saw me cut up the butter. Mine was already frozen in my large deep freeze, so it was very, very hard. But if your butter is not frozen, you'll want to cube it, then put it in the freezer for 10 to 15 minutes if you're using a food processor to make this happen. That way you're getting super cold butter and it cuts really well into your flour. As a result, you're going to get that flaky, beautiful crust, and you don't have to work very hard at it like I remember my mom doing when I was a kid, using a pastry blender to make it happen if you have a food processor. Those blades will whip around in there and just totally cut up your butter, so it really made it like to a sandy texture really, really fast. Now, this is a secret ingredient. First time I'm using it. This is vodka. This recipe specifically said that a tablespoon of vodka, and you cannot separate or substitute, I should say, any other liquor, but a tablespoon of vodka will change the pie crust drastically, making it extra flaky. And I can say it really did turn out pretty well. If you saw my size there, I went to a local liquor store and I'm like, I need a tiny, tiny bottle of vodka. And she started to get me like a pint. And I was like, do you have anything small? I need a tablespoon for my pie crust. And she looked at me like I was the craziest person she'd seen in a while, and pulled out that little tiny bottle. So super happy to have that around. The only other thing left to add here is some ice cold water. Now you want to start off slow, adding just a tablespoon or two at a time because you want the consistency to kind of form together in your hand, but still be a little bit on the crumbly side. Now I can say I think my crust could have taken a touch more water before I was done, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't go overboard and end up with one that was too wet. In the end, there were no complaints, but definitely make sure to monitor the consistency, getting the proper moisture content. Next time, I will add another tablespoon or two of water, but I definitely will be remaking this crust again soon for an upcoming turkey pot pie. I'm planning to do a full week of absolutely amazing content on what we can do with these turkey leftovers after this dinner's over. So if you're moving closer to the holidays and wondering what to do with all that you have left after Thanksgiving, make sure to come back and check out my channel because I plan to have that up and ready to go for you. Now, once the crust is all put together in a disc shape, the recipe says to chill it for at least 15 minutes. At this point in my day, I left to go pick up my kiddos, so this went in the refrigerator for quite a while. My dough was also in the other room still rising, but it was the perfect time for me to run errands because everything was pretty wrapped up. So at this point, I want to show you what it looks like after it's doubled. So it's risen a ton. It's still smooth and beautiful. And as I mentioned before, I did run and pick up my girls, but when they got back, they wanted to take a peek at the dough. It's one of the things they love touching and looking at. Once the dough reaches this stage, all you want to do is go in and gently deflate it. There is no big punching down when it comes to brioche. So I very lightly pulled around the insides of the bowl, put a lid on it, and put it in the refrigerator for a very slow second rise. So I let this stay in overnight and didn't pull it out till the next day around noon. So it was in there about 18 hours, I think, give or take. And it still was absolutely amazing when I pulled it out. It didn't overproof or anything. Putting it in the refrigerator really slows down that process, making it doable on your own timeline. The last thing I'm going to do this evening before we get ready for tomorrow is go ahead and roll out this pie crust. And yes, I could have waited, but in my mind, I needed to get at least one more thing accomplished. So I knew I could go to bed and rest easy with the time schedule that we had for the following day and being able to accomplish everything that was left. So with this crust, I didn't mention before, but it is a full butter crust. There's no shortening. So that helps to add to the flaky layers, but it also means that it needs to be extra cold in order to keep it all from melting and working well. Taking my pie crust or pie pan, I put it upside down to measure and make sure my crust was large enough. It's supposed to be at least an inch larger than the edges in order to make it fit really well. I could have gone maybe a half inch longer on some areas while I had others that were a little longer. Rolling out a pie crust into a perfect circle is an art that my mother has perfectly achieved, as well as my mother-in-law, but I am yet to get the perfect circle. The truth is, none of that matters. In the end, you're going to cut off the edges and crimp them and make a beautiful dough. So even if you have to start over rolling it out a time or two, nobody's going to care in the end. I would just encourage you that even if you've never done any of this before, that you can do it. You just have to go slow and have a plan. Now, I am buttering this pie pan. I don't know that it's absolutely necessary because of the stone that it is, but I didn't want to have anything sticking to the bottom, so just went ahead and did that kind of as a preventative order. Once I got this all pressed in and crimped, it did get some plastic wrap before going in the refrigerator. That's one thing I will say about this particular pie pan is that the plastic wrap doesn't stick super well, so I was a little extra worried about that drying out. I would make sure that you have a really good seal or that you are making the pie crust the same day. If you want to go ahead and put it in your crust, that'll just help to avoid any of those worries with it drying out in advance while it's in your refrigerator overnight. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that's the end of my first day and I am tired. I could not believe all the work that I got done. It was really nice to be able to be in the kitchen and move super fast without anybody running through and interrupting, but I also miss their cute little smiling faces. So I'm going to take off, go put them to bed, and come back to this tomorrow. For those of you hanging around, if you don't know me already, I feel like at this point into this conversation, you deserve to know a little bit more about me. So my name is Jill. I am a homeschooling mom to 5 beautiful kids, ages 11 and under. And my husband and I moved back from out of state after we had our first, before we had our second. just to be close to family. And as time goes by, we have learned so much more about the importance of that and really just strive to live here and raise our family in a way that is both natural as well as budget conscious when it comes to the food that we feed our family. So if you're looking for tips and tricks and ways to not only feed your family high quality foods, but do it on the lowest price possible, I hope you'll hang out because I think you'll like what we have to share. Now, day 2, my first mission was to get started on that brioche braid. Now, I am balancing my huge mixing bowl on top of an upside down bowl so I can effectively read the numbers on my scale. I do wish I had one that had a pull-out readout, but since I don't, I just do whatever I can to make it work. The goal here is to divide the total weight of your dough into 3, and then to get them measured properly, this says they need to be 80 centimeters long. The thing here is it needs to be pretty precise in order for the baking time to come out right. So you want to evenly divide your dough. If your dough has a thicker strand and a thinner strand, then you're going to come out with one that is a little more chewy, and that'll run throughout the whole entire braid. So I definitely would recommend grabbing a scale to do this if you already have one. I find that I use it way more than I thought I would, and it's really, really handy in all sorts of applications in the kitchen. Now, once the pieces are divided out, the appropriate length is critical. This will make sure that your cooking time is appropriate. The only other way to get around that, if you decide to go with a shorter piece for each strand, is to make sure that you're using a thermometer to get the ideal temperature inside the bread when it's done. You really cannot tell by looking at the outside of a loaf of bread or a braid in this case, if it's complete or not. You want to make sure that internal temperature reaches 200 degrees, and I'll show you a little bit more about exactly how I do that later. In order to get these strands to the 80 centimeter length, I am letting gravity help me out along this process. So I'm squeezing them, rolling them, pulling on them. And then if you notice here, when I set them down, they're not quite as long as I want them to be. I went ahead and put my spatula out at the end so I knew exactly where it needed to stop. And as I worked each of these, I was really able to let them relax for a few minutes. And as you can see here, it was super easy to get the appropriate length once I gave them a couple minutes rest time on the counter. So if you're ever working with a dough and you can't quite get it to stay where you want it, just take a break, move on to another piece or another project, come back in 5 or 10 minutes, and you'll be amazed with how easily the dough will stretch into your desired length. Once you get your pieces to the desired length, go ahead and just pinch them together at the top and then take your 3 strands and give them a really large gap so that when you are moving your outside piece to the middle, it's not all bunching up like you see here right now. Once you give yourself some more space, it's really so much easier to pull that outside piece to the middle and continue with the process. One thing I will say, you want to make sure your braid strands are very even. So pulling them at the same angle every single time is important if you're looking for a uniform look in the end. While it definitely does not have to look perfect because it tastes so amazing, when I'm taking this much time and making this loaf of bread over 2 days, I just want to do the best that I can to ensure that the final product is going to represent the work and care that I have put into it. So as you can see here, the braid is totally complete. And again, at the end, I did tuck those ends under just like I did to start off the braid. Now, when you go to pick this up, be prepared. It is pretty heavy because it's a really, really long braid. You don't have to form this in a circle if you don't want, but this just leaves a nice space. If you wanted to stuff it with some sort of topping or dip, you have that ring open to do so. I just find that the presentation's really pretty, but you could do it in any shape or form that you want. If you want a long rope, you can do that. Or if you want to make it in a horseshoe, just do whatever's going to work best for the presentation that you have in mind at the end. Once your braid is complete, make sure to put some plastic wrap on it and set it someplace warm so it can rise. The rise should take about 2 hours, so you want to make sure to give yourself plenty of time to get it doubled in size before you place it in the oven. Now I'm moving on to that pumpkin pie. The fact that this was all prepped yesterday and all I had to do was pour the filling into the crust was a huge time saver. Because we finished those brown butter pecan pie bars yesterday, the desserts are all wrapped up once we get this one through the oven. This does bake at 350 for about 50 minutes, give or take. So just make sure that when you pull it out, it's not jiggly in the middle. Can I just tell you how many times I had to re-record that pecan pie bar bit? If you want a good laugh, try to say that 5 times fast. I will guarantee that you will struggle, or I hope I'm not the only one who can't get my words out today. All right, with that under wraps, let's talk turkey. Now, I told you before that I went to great lengths to make sure I was sourcing a quality turkey that I wanted to give my family. But I also didn't want to spend hours cooking it. And one of the concerns that I always have with turkey is that I really just I think it always turns out drier than I want. It's not one of my favorite meats. So I was looking for a way to remake this bird into something that my family would love. Now, can I tell you, my family absolutely loves when I spatchcock a chicken. So I thought that this would be a great opportunity to spatchcock a turkey. Now, if you can't tell, spatchcocking is cutting out the backbone and laying the turkey flat to cook. This does several things. One is that it cuts your cooking time in half. This 12-pound bird was done in a little over an hour. And I did use some digital meat thermometers to probe to make sure that it was completely done, taking out all of the guesswork. The recipe itself told me it would take about an hour and 30, but I was able to get the time down a little bit just by completely and fully monitoring the time and temperature inside the bird. Now, there are several different ways to spatchcock. This is not my favorite way, but when I was reading up on methods to spatchcock a turkey, I saw several different websites that said just to cut the backbone. The way I do my chicken is I cut along the backbone and I remove the whole rib cage from the bird, which helps it to lay way flatter. It also means in the end that you don't have any bones to worry about in the breast and the whole rib cage is gone. So in the future, I'll probably do it that way. But if you want to do it the easy way, easy in quotes, because you have to have some real hand strength as well as some very sharp scissors to get that bone cut out. But once you get it cut out, you just want to lay it out on a rimmed sheet pan because it is going to come up with a lot of juice, and then just push down really hard on that breastplate. You want to hear all the cartilage and everything kind of cracking and giving way so it can lay as flat as possible. This gets the most surface area for your skin, which is skin side up, to get really crispy and brown. It also makes your turkey extra juicy because you're not cooking it as long. So if you're looking to increase flavor and cut your time in half, I highly recommend spatchcocking a turkey. I know a lot of people like the grand display of having the whole big bird set out on the middle of the table, but usually you take that bird away and you cut it up anyway. So having my big flayed out spatchcock turkey worked just as efficiently for us. After you get the turkey split open and laying out on your sheet pan, make sure to give it a couple hours rest. This allows the skin to dry out, which keeps it from staying soggy, which is a critical element in making this turkey really, really tasty and in high demand for my family. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, onions, and garlic are some of my favorite things to have on Thanksgiving. But I don't necessarily like the marshmallow and the syrupy texture that comes along with traditional Thanksgiving sweet potatoes. And I also don't always want a mashed potato. So my answer to this for making it healthier and easier for me was to roast all of these vegetables on big sheet pans in the oven at 450 while the turkey was baking. This gives the vegetables a nice caramelization and makes for really, really easy side dishes that give all of the flavors that you're looking for without the extra syrup and ingredients that I am trying to avoid. Now, if you are not a fan of Brussels sprouts, I would implore you or beg you to try them cut in half and roasted. And also, if you're roasting vegetables, make sure you don't pull them out when they're still soft. You want a little bit of crunch to them. I want my Brussels sprouts to look like they're starting to burn. Like that char is so delicious, and it really changes the flavor of what you're eating. So get them almost to the point where you would think, I don't know, maybe I've gone too far. That's the perfect spot. That also made the sweet potatoes so crunchy on the outside and creamy and delicious on the inside. It was so good that I was actually pretty happy when one of my girls decided she wasn't a fan of the orange potatoes after all. So anytime I can clean up something that they're not going to go for and that I actually love, I think it's a huge hit. Now it's time for the carrots. And if you know my channel at all, you know I love my Vago kitchen composter. So I am just taking all of the scraps when peeling my carrots and putting them straight in that bucket so I can go ahead and get them composted and back into my garden for nutrition. Now for the carrots themselves, I was going to roast them in the oven, but doing the math and only having one oven, needing to get braid in there and the sheet pans for the vegetables to go in later as well as the turkey, I decided to move them to a stovetop option. So we'll see those in a little bit later. They are going to be beautiful honey glazed carrots. Now, at this point, my bread had been setting out for about an hour and 45 minutes. And full confession, if I had an extra 15 to give it, I would have let it rise a little bit longer. But looking at the time I was ready to serve the meal and the amount of time I thought it was going to take the turkey, I knew this guy had to get in the oven because it bakes at 350. The turkey and the vegetables need to go at 450. The hardest part of the entire meal for me was actually oven management. So if you are going to a holiday dinner where everybody's bringing their own dish, that really won't be an issue, but make sure to really stress and take a look at all of those recipes and figure out when you can put things in and how you can make it all happen in time. Now we're going to jump back to the turkey. So after it's had time to dry off, I am taking some olive oil and a few spices, mixing them together, and we're going to brush it on top of this beautiful bird. But before we do, we have to check on this bread. Now, I did have my oven racks a little bit closer than I should have, considering how high this actually rose once it got in the oven. I was aware that that could happen, but I really thought I was fine. So make sure to give yourself a little extra space because this one pops up a ton. Now, once I went ahead and put my thermometer in here, you can see that even after or really close to the appropriate time, I was still way off of the internal temperature. If your bread is under 200 degrees, it is not done inside. And looking at the outside of that bread, it looked quite beautiful. I might not have known that if I hadn't taken the temperature. So if you are going to bake bread at home, I highly recommend a digital instant read thermometer. Otherwise, you might come up with a gummy, gooey product and be really disappointed, especially when you're putting it on the table for an event such as Thanksgiving. Now, with the bread in the oven, it's time to get the turkey taken care of. So we brushed the oil all over the bird, making sure to get it fully covered. Then I sprinkled some poultry seasoning on top, plus salt and pepper. You can use the seasoning of your choice. Whatever works for your family and the taste you're looking for is exactly what I would recommend doing. Now, a turkey is done when the thickest part of the thigh reaches 165 degrees internally. I am using a wireless thermometer to make sure that I'm getting it done at the exact right time and pulling it out so it doesn't get overly dry. This has really taken all of the guesswork for me out of all of the meats that we've been preparing lately. And just to double check, I put one on each side. That really gave me the confidence as I had to anyway, to make sure that I was getting it fully complete, both sides, thickest part to that 165 mark. If you don't already have a wireless meat thermometer, then I will put the link down in the comments because it has been such a huge help to make sure I never overcook any of the meat in my kitchen anymore. Now, the bread, as you can see, has reached 200. I did pull on my rack that little tallest part on the back side where my braid came together. So you saw a little crack in the top. I was a little sad about that just for display purposes. But man, it turned out so good. The buttery flakiness of that bread was something that even my husband, who's been on a carnivore kick lately, could not resist. So now it's time to move on to the carrots. As you can see here, I took some olive oil, threw it in my cast iron pan, and got it pretty hot. You want to make sure that all the carrots can lay in the bottom of the pan, cut side down. This ensures that you're getting a nice char on the bottom of them, which is really going to help develop the flavors and give you a nice caramelization when you add in the honey and the water here in a little bit. I did flip mine over after they had been down for maybe 4 or 5 minutes and repeated on the opposite side as well. Now take a look here. You notice my oven rack? This is like danger incoming, right? It started to tip out at the end, which has never happened before, so I wasn't sure what's going on. I went ahead and tried to put my second rack in, but because of where the bird was, I had to move it up a little higher than normal, and the tray was actually hitting on something coming down on the top. So now I have to have a service call on my oven to see exactly what is wrong with the heating element up there. I had been having a few problems with improper or irregular heating patterns. Some of my food was turning out more done on one side. So now I have an excuse per se to go ahead and make that call and get them out here. But let's just say that when the turkey is in the oven and the vegetables are ready to go and almost fall out on the ground is not the time when you find out your oven is not working properly. So I had to pull everything out. Try not to drop the turkey or spill any of the juice that was already coming out. And then move all of the racks down a notch to make sure I could get everything in. I find that if you can be cool and calm in times of stress, it really helps with things like this. And that's exactly where I was at this point. First of all, I have family coming over to eat this meal shortly. Secondly, my stinking oven, which I totally love, is not functioning properly. And I almost dropped all of those vegetables that I had cut on the floor. So with everything readjusted, I put the turkey back in. I was actually really thankful in the end that I did have some vegetable trays to go on top of the turkey, because it was a little closer to the oven rack or to the top than I wanted it to be. And it was getting a little extra brown in one specific spot. So putting these trays on top really helped to diffuse the heat and still get the entire turkey and the vegetables done in perfect time. Now that we have avoided the near crisis, it's time to go ahead and move forward with those carrots. So I'm adding some water here. It's just going to help them steam up and soften throughout, and then the honey on top. Once you turn the heat down and let this kind of simmer on the stove, you're going to develop a beautiful caramelization and some awesome flavor on those carrots. So if you want something simple and quick, this took about 10 minutes to put together. This is going to be a new kind of weeknight staple vegetable for us because it came together so easily and really did have a great flavor along with it. We are rounding the corner toward home here as we head into one of the last dishes that I'm going to put together over on the stove, which is some garlic buttered green beans. Now, if you are used to a traditional Thanksgiving green bean casserole with the cream of mushroom soup, I was looking for something a little bit lighter, but to still give the beautiful taste of a green bean. If you haven't ever thrown frozen or fresh green beans in butter with some garlic, you are absolutely missing out. Make sure to throw a little salt and pepper in there too, and just let them steam, put the lid on, and let it go for a few minutes. And you have the most delicious, wonderful side dish that you could have, minus all of the texture and additives and preservatives that come along with that condensed soup. Now we're headed back to the pantry while those green beans and carrots go ahead and finish up. Now the recipe specifically says to use a glass or stainless steel bowl. I know for a fact that my mixer does a fabulous job with a plastic bowl. I decided to go ahead and put my bowl and the beaters in the freezer for about 10 minutes to get everything completely cold. Whipped cream is super easy. All you have to do is put the cream in and start mixing until you see a little bit of foam. Now my mixer is super fast, so I went ahead and put a lid on top to avoid the inevitable splatter that was incoming. Then I cranked it up on high. Once your whipped cream comes to a little bit of a foamy texture, it's time to go ahead and add the powdered sugar and the vanilla. So I took a look and wasn't quite there, turned it up a little bit higher, and before I knew it, it was beyond the foaming stage and already cream, but it did not make a difference at all. I was able to just pour in my homemade powdered sugar, which we made together last week, as well as the vanilla, and get it mixed up until it turned out absolutely beautifully. Now, once again, I do want to point you back to the description where you can find all of the recipes that I've shown you here today. Now, this specific recipe called for about half of the amount of powdered sugar that I went ahead and put in here, but after reading the comments, I saw many people saying that it was really good to double it. And from my childhood, I don't remember my mom ever actually using powdered sugar. I think she used regular sugar. So either will work. If you don't have powdered sugar or a blender that's strong enough to powder the sugar that you already have, just go ahead and use your regular sugar. It's okay with me. It's actually what I grew up with, to have a little bit of the texture of that sugar in there. It makes it extra sweet and extra special. So just use whatever you have on hand. I promise you will not mess this up. I blended until I had a pretty stiff peak on my whipped cream, which means that it holds its shape together really nicely when you pull it out. And that's exactly what you can see here. It got inside those beaters and turned into really nice dollops. Now, my favorite part of whipped cream as a child was making sure to clean up the bowl and the beaters. So since I happened to be home alone, I got that pleasure all to myself. But my kids were very happy with that. They actually wanted just the whipped cream for dessert, a couple of them, which normally I would say no to. But since we are talking about holidays, that's actually something that I did quite often as a kid. Now, at this point, my turkey was almost done. And I'm super glad I put 2 probes in, because you can see here one side says 1 minute remaining and the other said 5. So I did wait until I got that 5-minute side fully complete before pulling it out. I wouldn't have wanted to pull it out slightly undercooked by using just the 1 probe, so having 2 was really, really handy. And if you check out this bird, you're going to notice it is so crispy. It is amazingly crispy, and the amount of juice that came out of this later was next level. So definitely do recommend the spatchcock turkey. Not only does it save you a ton of time to cook, but it also delivers on increased texture for your skin and increased juiciness for the inside bird. My vegetables were also complete at this time. So you can see some of the edges have that nice char that I was talking to you about earlier. They were so dang good. So once the turkey's done, you want to go ahead and get it off of the pan that it cooked on and onto a cutting board so it can cool. That helps to cool it faster and prevents that hot pan from cooking it a little more. Do make sure that the cutting board you're putting it on has a well to catch the juice, because as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a very juicy bird and you don't want the juice to run off of your board and all over the floor. Don't ask me how I know. I might or might not have done that with several different slices of meat at different points in my life. And I got tired of cleaning it up off the floor. So make sure that you have something that you can put it in, or a cutting board with a juice well, before going ahead and moving it off of your rimmed tray. Now I'm throwing together a quick gravy with the drippings from that turkey, because who would want those to go to waste, right? So I threw some butter in a pan, then added some flour, got it nice and browned before adding the juice. Now, I decided that this wasn't quite enough for my family, so I went ahead and grabbed some chicken stock out of my refrigerator and poured in a little extra into the pan. If you have turkey stock on your pantry shelves, definitely go ahead and use it, but don't hesitate to pull out the chicken if you need to. A lot of times, turkey and chicken are kind of interchangeable in many of the dishes that you can make with them going forward. So that's it. And I want to give you a final look at that dessert bar and a little cue there on my pie cutting. I love to use a pizza cutter for all desserts because it goes through so smoothly and gives a really nice finish. So just a little tip there on how to easily serve what you have going on. With my crew back home, we're ready to celebrate. And I hope you've taken some tips with you that'll serve you along the way too. Now, one more thing before you go, don't forget to check the link in the description to take advantage of that awesome ButcherBox deal. You can save up to an additional $100 this weekend only. And don't miss an opportunity to pick up that free turkey or ham for your Thanksgiving table.